Welcome to Have a Life Teaching, the podcast designed for educators who are dedicated to enhancing their teaching practice and creating a positive impact on their students' lives. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of education, exploring a wide range of topics related to curriculum, instruction, and assessment in K12 schools. Together, we'll learn from the brightest minds in the education field. So if you're a passionate educator who's ready to take your teaching practice to the next level, join us as we explore the exciting world of education. My name is John Shimbari, signing in and saying, let's have a life teaching. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Have a Life Teaching podcast. We spent a lot of time talking about literacy and teaching writing and how we actually promote literacy. But there's another type of literacy, particularly here in the United States, that I believe we need to spend some attention on and towards. And that's definitely math fluency. When we look at math performance in the United States, particularly vis-a-vis other industrialized countries, our students are not scoring as well. And I don't think necessarily that's about testing per se, but how we're teaching math. And are we really engaging our students in the process of math? I'm really excited to have Dr. Jo Boaler joining us. She is a professor of mathematics education at Stanford University. She is the author of a great new book that we're going to talk about, Mathish, which gets into how to engage students in math learning. And she is also co-founder of two organizations, both ucube.org, which is about really promoting a creative mindset in our students through math, as well as Struggly, which is a math learning content platform that, again, is going to help our students develop those brain connections through math. Jo, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat with you.
Likewise. Now, Jo, one question I always ask my guests when they come on is, how did math education become your area of interest?
I was actually, when I was at school, I planned to be a scientist, and I only took maths because you take maths when you take science subjects in England at A level. And that was when I had the first amazing maths teacher I'd ever had, where she actually got us to discuss ideas. And that just changed everything for me. It changed how I thought about myself. It changed how I thought about maths. Up until that point, it had been a teacher putting lots of questions on the board, and we'd just sit and compute answers. That got me thinking maths is actually really interesting, but I still went to university planning to become an educational psychologist. And when you become an educational psychologist, you are required to teach for some time. And I chose maths because that was one of my favorite subjects. And I started teaching in London schools, and I just realized I was really interested in maths education, not educational psychology. I chose to do a master's degree because I just wanted to think about it more and understand more about it. And that was the beginning of the maths ed path.
I love that. And actually, you more or less gave me my segue to my next question. And by the way you answered that question, and it really resonated with me when you were talking about your teacher teaching math in a way that got you discussing things. Because if we think about it, if you're going to become an educational psychologist, if you're going to become a scientist, even if you're going to become an educator in any subject area, literacy, social studies, doesn't matter. We want to be looking at data to make sense of the world in which we're living, our impact, the success we're having or lack thereof, what we're going to do about that. We really do need to have those math discussions. But rather than me saying the why this is important, why do you think it's important that we engage students further in the process of learning math, and particularly in having these math discussions?
Well, maths is important. It's actually something that's throughout our world. And for anybody to function effectively as an adult, they need a form of mathematical literacy. We know that the amount of mathematical literacy someone has really predicts their outcomes for many years ahead. and that sadly many people do not develop mathematical literacy, and then they're not on a pathway that allows them to really function well in life or get good jobs. Maths is important. I also happen to think it's a really beautiful subject if you approach it in the right way, and it can be really creative. A lot of the activities on our UCubed website show maths to be a visual, creative subject, also in the Struggly app, because I find that when kids get to look at an interesting mathematical situation and think about what it means, talk to each other about it, where they get to see something visually, then they're building a really good and important understanding. One of the things my new book, Mathish, talks about is how neuroscientists know that the way we all go about the world is we're building models in our heads. For example, they give an example of learning what a stapler is. So you never use the stapler, you have no model of a stapler. But as you learn to use it, you actually learn what it looks like, what it feels like, what it sounds like, how it changes as you interact with it, what you do with it. And this builds a model, and this model is stored in the neocortex of the brain. The neocortex has huge amount of models. That's how we go around in the world. We use these models to predict what's going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, we adapt them. And in maths, we know that the most successful people are those who've built these models. They don't think of maths as just lots of methods and rules. They can really think of something clearly in the way they've built it up as a model. And to develop those models, you need to interact with maths in different ways. You don't get them just from calculating. You get them from building things and experiencing maths visually and physically and writing about it and really getting the whole brain involved in understanding it.
It's interesting you say that because we have had some guests on talking about maker spaces and using spaces to further a student's creative knowledge about
I love making
topics.
spaces.
Yeah, so definitely recommend that episode to folks listening, and that's with Matt Ziegler. And so when you're talking about developing the sense of creativity in students, and I know you talk about this in the book, and I know again that this is some of the work you're doing at UCubed. How do you help, say, a typical elementary school teacher who
Mhm.
might not be as grounded in the neuro research?
Mhm.
What would you suggest they do to promote this kind of learning environment where students are creating models, where they are thinking math and discussing
Mhm.
math and not just doing those calculations?
Right.
Granted, they're important, those calculations, to ensure accuracy, but doing all these other things that really make math exciting.
Well, I would say come to UCubed and try some of the lessons we have on our site. We have something on the site that's called the Week of Inspirational Maths. We started a few years ago. And we said to teachers, just try, just give us a week and try teaching maths in this way. And all the lessons invite kids to think visually and creatively. And the teachers just loved them. The kids loved them. The teachers loved them. And so now we get hundreds of thousands of schools are downloading those lessons. But we have also books, we have lessons to go across the year. A very simple thing you can do as a teacher of maths is asking students, how do you see it? If you can develop visuals of different mathematical ideas, and they're on the internet, they're on our website, they're all over the place, and then just ask students to talk to each other about what do you see, they will have great discussions. Just showing them an interesting collection of dots and asking them, how would you group them? What groups would you form? Kids are looking at them, they're developing these ideas of groups of numbers. I would make everything visual. I often say to teachers, if you, whatever area of maths you're teaching, however narrow and boring it seems, send it to me and I will give you a visual version of that maths that's more interesting.
Have you found teachers to be particularly interested in one lesson or the other on UCubed?
We definitely have some super popular lessons that people really enjoy. One, actually, we got from a CS professor who made this beautiful visual of the numbers 1 to whatever, 24, showing their factors. So they're these little dotty diagrams for every number. And it's actually rather beautiful. And we have this sheet, and teachers use it in all sorts of different ways. They love to give it to kids and just notice patterns. I give it to adults and ask them what patterns they see. And they'll notice, like, oh, all the numbers that are divided in this way have this kind of shape. So that's a really popular one. But it's hard to choose. There are a lot that are loved.
In your book, Mathish,
Yes.
what would you say, what are your hopes that folks get out of the book? What are maybe 2 or 3 takeaways that you really want people to come away with?
Well, let me start with one of my current favorites with actually what is mathish. So the argument in the book that people use numbers all the time in their life, but there's something rather particular about those numbers. They're often not very precise, and they're normally what I call ish numbers. Examples might be, how long is the drive to the airport? How much of the moon can we see tonight? How many people are in this crowd? How much snow fell overnight? How old are you? I could go on and on and on. And in all cases, we would just give an ish answer. But in classrooms, maths is all about precision. And so one of the things we know is that when people are thinking in an ish way, so if I asked you something like, I don't know, 272 divided by 8, if you were to calculate that, it would be a very gnarly calculation. But if you ished it, your brain would be in a different mode of thinking. So it turns out that it's important to be in both of those modes, to be in that precise calculational mode, but also in that bigger picture. Because as you're thinking big picture, you're actually thinking more conceptually. One of the examples that I give in the book was a question that was given out as a standardized test as part of NAEP, in fact. And the students were given this question. They were asked the answer to 12/13 plus 7/8. And then they were given 4 choices. Is it 1, 2, 19, or 21? So 12/13 plus 7/8. And the most common answer from 17-year-olds was 19. So here you give 2 fractions that are very close to 1, 12/13 and 7/8. And you would hope that kids would say, those are both really close to 1. I'm going to say 2. But in fact, hardly any of them did. They either chose 19 or they chose 21, which is pretty scary, actually. So I would say that part of that comes about because we haven't given kids the opportunity to ish numbers. If we did, they would not be making these crazy mistakes. They would be really developing number sense. But one of the reasons I'm even more excited about it than I was when I wrote the book is I was talking about this at a conference in December in California, and a teacher emailed me the next week and said, oh, I went straight back to my 6th grade class and I asked kids to ish numbers. We were doing ratio. I asked them to ish them. And she said something amazing happened. All the kids who were afraid of maths and never contribute suddenly started raising their hands. And she's been doing this now for a few weeks. We went back, in fact, and filmed her. So we have a little video of the kids. And as she says, it's amazing. It's changed the culture of the classroom. Now kids are not afraid to come up with answers because, they can come up with their ish answer. And then we have a conversation about the difference between the ish answer and the precise answer. So that's the mathish piece of it. That it's a push to let go of all of that precision. Maths for a lot of kids is a very sharp subject with very sharp edges, that it's quite scary for a lot of kids and they don't feel comfortable. And a lot of that is to do with thinking that they have to come up with these precise answers all the time. It was great, actually. When I was presenting also, somebody said to me, oh, have you read the book Ish by Peter Reynolds? It's a book about how a kid gets more free in their art and by making ish pictures. So I wrote to Peter Reynolds and I said, oh, you have a book with Ish and I've got this book coming out called Mathish. And he wrote straight back to me and said, yay, we should collaborate. And So we're having a little ish collaboration now.
I love that. So now, if I was say, an elementary school teacher or a high school teacher, and I wanted to ish my math, what would be a very kind of simple way to ish it?
For a teacher, it's really just asking kids before they ever do a calculation or before they do a graph or really whatever mathematical thing they're doing, just asking them, what do you think it's going to be? What do you think that graph's going to look like? Or what do you think the numbers will be? What are your ish numbers? And what happens is it moves the brain into this different mode of thinking that's really helpful for people. And I'm not saying, and I have to say what I'm not saying because people misquote me. I am not saying that precision is not important, but I am saying that we're kind of out of balance. And it would be better in classrooms if we had more of a balance between the precise and the imprecise.
That really resonates with me, especially as a consultant myself, Joe, where I'm going into schools and I'm seeing students tense up when they start learning math. And quite frankly, I even see teachers tensing up
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
they're teaching math. We can't get to that precision or that love to develop that precision if we can't get students thinking mathematically or
Yeah.
being open to thinking mathematically. That resonates with me, that balance. I will say that I've been pleasantly surprised that you do at least see some more math textbook publishers building in what are called like solvent shares, where students are not necessarily expected to get the right answer, but to think about what a graph might be displaying, what they're seeing, what they're
It's
thinking
really great.
about the math.
Yeah, we are starting to see more of that and more visuals and more number talks. You mentioned number talks, which is so valuable. The ish part is one part of the book, but I also have other things in there, such as I really believe we have to teach kids how to learn. I think a lot of the time we go into classrooms as teachers and we just expect kids to know how to learn. And in maths, that's particularly problematic because many kids have been subject to this kind of awful maths experience. They don't really know that maths is really about being skeptical and questioning each other's ideas and reasoning and being playful with numbers. They don't know any of that. I talk in the book about the importance of teaching our kids how to learn. And there's a lot of the book is talking about the need for conceptual, connected maths, not lists of methods and procedures, but actually a connected set of ideas, why that's good for our brain. I have some different neuroscience in the book about the importance of struggling. I'm a big advocate for helping people know that times of struggle are really good for our brains.
In fact, one of the schools that I'm working with, the principal is very keen, and I understand why she's keen on doing this, in the teaching of math, doing what's called CPA, conceptual, pictorial, and then abstract, help her students gain that overall sense of math as more than just these random numbers, but again, to your point, a model or an explanation. I'm going to go back and tell her that we had this conversation and that she is on the right path.
Yes.
And the other thing, too, that you were mentioning is this idea of productive struggle. How would you recommend teachers create these math classrooms with productive struggle?
Well, first of all, we're not there, that's for sure. And many kids feel terrible when they struggle in maths class. So I regularly teach kids. In fact, I'm going out to teach some elementary students next week. And I also teach undergrads at Stanford, I teach middle school students, whoever they are. I always start by sharing some neuroscience. And one of the things I share is that the very best time for our brains is when we're struggling. That's when our brains are building connections and strengthening pathways. And we want to be struggling. It's really good to be in a time of struggle. I love teachers who really develop comfort with struggle with kids. Some I've worked with use James Nottingham's metaphor of the learning pit. I don't know if you've seen that, but
I don't know that. Would you mind explaining that?
so he talks about this pit of struggle. And one of the teachers I work with, her whole fifth grade class made a learning pit together. And as they're going down into this long pit, the kids are saying things like, I'm no good at maths, I can't do it. But then as they're climbing out, they're saying, I just need to get some tools, I need to try harder. And the teachers talk about being in the pit is super important and you want to be there. She says, I could hold your hand and we could jump over the pit together, but I don't want that because it's really good for your brain to be in this time of struggle. She said that sometimes her students come to her and they say, Miss Schaefer, I'm really in the pit. And her response to that is, fantastic. What tools do you need? She doesn't jump in and help them take away the struggle. She just says, what tools would be helpful? And she values that time. Really important. We have some lovely videos on YouTube of teachers who really value struggle with their kids. And there's a new one on there called Moving from Maths Anxiety that I made for the OECD, the group in Paris, and worked with a great teacher I know. And you see in the video how she sets up this mistakes-friendly, struggle-friendly environment.
Yeah, I will often suggest teachers provide anchor charts for folks, so for students. I even sometimes, and love to get your thought on this, ask teachers to set up learning activities where students could be correcting mathematical practices that somebody else did, and then, more or less assessing or evaluating
Yeah, that's
how
a good.
well that other student went through the
Yeah,
process of solving that computation. And then if they could be bringing in those real world connections, all the better. If it's
yeah,
if they're connecting that math to some population of wolves study, or just to again show students that this really is a skill that we
yeah,
need just as much
absolutely.
as we need to write and read.
Absolutely. I do think that elementary teachers really do a great job of making maths physical and developing these really important models in the brain. They're using different forms of manipulatives. Starts to peter out in middle school, and by high school, it's gone. It's all abstract calculations. Kids rarely ever see the application of what they're doing in any real world situations. So I worry a lot about high school maths.
And I do too, because then for those of us that do go on and want to become, say, policy analysts or researchers, then we do have to make that connection, real world. I mean, I'm thinking back to that monkey on my shoulder I could never get rid of, which was my dissertation. And part of the process of my dissertation was research,
Of
and
course,
both quantitative and qualitative.
right.
So I had to make those connections.
I'm very excited about one of the movements at the moment that's going across the country is a data science course for students in high school. This started a few years ago in California, where the UC system made a pronouncement that kids could take data science instead of Algebra 2, and then maybe follow it up with statistics rather than going on that calculus pathway. So that really gave a green light to universities and to schools to focus on that data science. And a data science course is all about the world. It is questions that you ask about events in the world. So now at this point, we have maybe a third of the states across the country have created new pathways for kids in high school that are focused on data science and statistics. We highlighted it in the California Maths Framework. I was one of the writers and got pushback from traditional mathematicians who want kids to only take algebra and calculus. And they're currently trying to push it out of California. So we'll see where that goes. That seems like the craziest thing in the world, but it's happening. But there are many, many states across the country now have built these new pathways for students. We have a high school course at UCubed in data science where the students in the first unit collect some data on their lives. They spend 24 hours collecting data. They're given some advice about what to collect. And then they come back into the classroom and they all talk about it and develop data visuals. And the students said to us, this is the first time ever in a maths class that I'm bringing my life into the class. It's really a different experience for kids. And so much more meaningful. They're still learning about algebra. They're still learning how to develop mathematical models, but they're doing it with data. And that changes a lot. It's a really productive move.
One question as you're talking, and I wasn't thinking of asking this, but I think you would be a good person to answer it. Are you seeing colleges accepting students that are going more this data science track than the traditional calculus or algebra track? How are institutions, especially coming from Stanford, looking at students who are taking this non-traditional math path?
Mhm.
Is that helping their applications, or how do
So, I mean,
universities?
there's a lot of mythology out there that you have to be on this calculus pathway to be attracted to universities. In fact, we've had statistics as an alternative fourth level course for 15, 20 years, and many kids have taken statistics instead of calculus and gone to college and had great careers. You talk about how much statistics is inside policy work and or research. It's actually useful for a wide range of majors. It's a bit of a myth that you need to have calculus, but it's certainly believed by a lot of parents, and they're frantic to get their kids on that pathway to calculus. In fact, only 16% of kids in the US take calculus in high school. So there's a large falling off and pushing off the pathway, unfortunately, and that happens earlier. So it's time for a rethink of it all, really.
Dr. Boaler, anything else that we haven't talked about math education that you think the listeners should know?
Well, I would say that something that I always want to talk about is the myth of the math brain. So many people still believe that. So many parents, teachers, students, and particularly if they start to struggle, they think, I don't have the right kind of brain. We know absolutely unequivocally that there is no such thing as a math brain, and that we're building strengthening pathways all the time. But still, so many people believe it. It's quite shocking how many people believe it. I saw a survey recently of parents, and 90% of them said, my student can either do math or they can't. We have a lot of work still to do to get this neuroscience about our brains out to people in the public. So I would say that is a really important message for people. Anybody can be good at maths, anybody can learn maths to any level. Even people who've had bad experiences and are behind can change their maths trajectory if that's what they want to do.
Exactly. And if we do continue the work on integrating math discussions into overall policy work or real world problems, hopefully we will move beyond that, because that is a scary statistic. I didn't realize it was that high. I
Yeah,
mean, in all honesty, I've been a part of conversations, and I would be lying if I myself, as a humanities teacher, didn't sometimes say it when I was younger too, like, oh, math's not my thing.
right.
So many of us say that.
Yeah,
We really stop to think about how all the subjects are interrelated.
that's right.
That might get us off this anxiety treadmill,
Yeah.
so to speak.
And of course, many people think math isn't their thing because of the awful ways they experience the teaching of maths. And it makes people think that maths isn't their thing and that it's only for some people. So that's why I'm so passionate about change, because we can change that. We can teach maths differently, where students don't get that idea and they all believe that they can learn and they all do really well. So it's really important to get those changes.
Dr. Bowler, where can people find out more about you and the work that you do?
Lots of ways, actually. So there's ucubed.org. My new book, which is you can already pre-order, is called Mathish. I have a new kind of app that you can access on at struggly.com. It's not in the App Store. It's you need a laptop or an iPad because it's very visual and creative. Yeah, find us in one of those places. I'm a Stanford professor. People can find me through email, and I'd love to hear from people.
Thank you so much for your time tonight, Joe. This has been great.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening today. I hope you got some great tips that you can bring back into your teaching. Remember, have a life teaching without sacrificing your own. Also, don't forget to subscribe and be well.